The company Concrete Canvas was set up by Will Crawford and myself based on an idea we had probably about 8 years ago now. The idea was a way of putting up buildings very quickly using inflation. So it's a very efficient way of building. So for example, the building we're in now took 2 guys about an hour to deploy, and then it's ready to use the next day. First 18 months really were spent developing the technology, getting the first full-scale prototypes of the building. What we found is that there was a potential for the concrete canvas material that we'd developed. We'd always sort of had that in the business plan, but it had been written around the shelters. And over time, the commercial potential of concrete canvas became so large that it sort of subsumed the shelters. We've done projects, for example, in the Middle East where they wrap pipelines underwater with divers. We do a lot of ditching and water management, where you're trying to line, say, earth ditches or rehabilitate existing concrete infrastructure that's become damaged over time. And in those cases, typically we take about 10% of the time of any other method for constructing that project. We've grown roughly 100% a year since we started sales, and then this year we're going to triple rather than doubling. So it's a very, very rapid pace of growth for what is still a relatively small company. So, given most valuations for a company are based on a track record of profitability, you normally would use something like a PE valuation, it's very, very hard in a rapidly growing company to accurately value it, particularly its IP assets at any one time, because the future is so uncertain, and because you've got such a rapid rate of growth, it's very, very easy to undervalue the company. Use a Sollomon valuation. Well, initially we came to it through a Welsh Assembly government funded scheme, and it seemed a useful way of giving our shareholders an idea of the intangible IP value with a justification behind it from a third party. So that was useful just for informing our shareholders. We then came back, I think it was about 1.5 years later, to revalue it, and that was because we were looking at an EMI option scheme for our employees. And again, for an EMI option scheme, we needed a realistic value for a startup. And at the end of the day, the only time you actually get a value for a startup is when you sell it to someone, or at least you sell part of your equity. So it's very hard to crystallise that for something like the EMI, where it's important that you have an agreed valuation with HMRC that everyone is happy with and thinks is realistic. So again, it was very useful to have a third party and a quick and easy system that's fairly transparent to enable us to get a valuation on what's probably the company's biggest asset in terms of its IP. So that was extremely useful just in terms of providing evidence to back up our accountants' ideas of what the company was worth to get that agreed valuation for the EMI option scheme. And that same valuation was also useful because at about the same time we were negotiating a licensing arrangement with a large American corporation for the US and Canada. So it's very useful to have a third party who you can use to look at those figures and also to look at the value of your IP and value your company. It's always difficult using web-based systems, particularly when you're very busy. But the nice thing about Inngot is it was relatively straightforward and it was laid out in a fairly sensible way. And unlike, for example, HMRC's websites when you're trying to do tax returns, it was actually quite easy to drill down and work out what figures you really wanted. So it was useful in that, one, it's laid out fairly sensibly. I didn't have any IT issues which you normally have with these things. Nothing crashed. It allowed me to return to it and save it and did what it was supposed to do. And most importantly, the telephone support, being able to phone up, very quickly speak to someone who's intelligent and who could discuss the process with you and explain all your queries so that you could get it as accurate as possible the first time without having to waste a huge amount of your own resources learning how to use the tool.